Welcome everybody to the University of Applied Research and Development, our emergency response and risk management podcast and videocast. I'm delighted to have with us today Dave Capelli and also Carla Mays from UC Berkeley, who are going to explain to us all the amazing things that they're doing across the world and in their location with disaster mitigation and all sorts of emergency things. So welcome, great to have you both here.
Thank you so much for having us.
How about you both introduce yourself, what you're doing, how you came to know each other, what's exciting you at the moment. Let's get the ball rolling.
I'm going to let David kick us off.
Hi, thank you. So I'm David Capelli, co-founder of Smart Cohort with Carla Mays here. We are a research nonprofit based out of the UC Berkeley Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society, or CITRIS for short. And we work on rapid response capacity building during disasters. I met Carla in 2015 when we were both delegates to the Global Innovation Summit hosted by T2 Ventures, and then Victor Wang, who went on to lead the Competence Foundation. And this took place in San Jose, California in February 15. And it was all around people from academia, philanthropy, venture capital, and government, and research that were looking at innovation ecosystems and how do we create a more equitable world in this world of innovation. Carla and I started working together, and this project emerged out of her fellowship. She was part of the first Impact Scholars Program at Singular University and NASA Ames in Mountain View. And we started working in our pilot in Miami with Smart Miami around Hurricane Irma, and looking at long-term recovery. And
David currently is the sitting, he's the chairman of the Millennial Policy Commission for Miami-Dade County. So there's in the U.S. there's 5 or 6 boards. There's 5 or 6 boards of millennial policy boards that inform the mayors of cities on folks under 40. On their life, their life, their housing, their job situation and things. And disaster, unfortunately, is one of those verticals now, whether it be pandemics or it's fires, earthquakes, or hurricanes, more and more. So I've had 12 years of working on emergency management. My background's in public administration. So I went to both the San Francisco State for my master's in public administration and urban studies. And then I went to UC Berkeley to the Haas School of Business to understand this from a business perspective on building the necessary funds and things that would be necessary in a disaster. How do you recover an economy, and how do you protect an economy? And it comes in handy when we're doing the work that we're doing here. Right now. So Smart Cohort, I was chosen as in the first group of impact scholars, as David so gratefully talked about. We were chosen because the innovation and technology were disrupting have been disruptors. So as David nicely put, this project started when I was chosen to be an inaugural fellow in the Singularity Impact class, global impact class. I was chosen of 1 or 2 Americans that was looking at governance. So we often think of Silicon Valley in the disruptive technology, venture capital, and really being innovative. But what we don't look at is the inequality and the challenges that, with all this innovation comes. There's a terrible, digital disconnection, and digital transformation comes with a lot of pain. And so in the Silicon Valley and in San Francisco Bay Area, we see a lot of income inequality, a lot of gentrification, displacement, a lot of, various different challenges. And when you add disaster on top of that, it really becomes a challenge. And so what David and I realized very quickly as when we first met was that David was in Florida and I was in California. Well, beside the sunshine, what do we both have? Lots of disaster. California has earthquakes and fires. In fires, David is dealing with hurricanes 6 months out of the year. And we happen to be joining you from Honolulu, where they have all the above, including dealing with the pandemic. But what they have is a lot of resiliency. And so during the, we ended up coming here to Honolulu 2 months ago to really look at how well they were doing. They're the only place in the United States where there's very little community spread of COVID-19. They have very little mortality. We're at about 17 deaths over the whole, and most of those folks had some kind of contact with the mainland. So they were not community grown cases that ended up, with it resulting in a mortality. We really saw that the folks here were very resilient in dealing with their senior population. So we don't have in the senior population a brush fire of COVID-19, causing illness and death. And then they have looking at their social equity structures were intact. So we see them feeding, we see them really growing a local economy, looking at where they don't have to be so reliant on the mainland and things coming in from the Bay Area or California for agriculture and sustenance. And looking at them during this time, trying to think about what does long-term recovery look like. One of the main factors that we look at is governance. Governance is playing a huge role in disasters. And so what David and I did right away was to really take the governance areas very, very seriously and be able to learn as much as we could about FEMA, because normally you don't see FEMA on a regular basis. FEMA is our federal emergency management agency in the US. So you normally don't see them, and it requires you have a good blue skies, relationship prior to a disaster, which is something that most folks don't have. They don't have those clearances. In fact, we've been talking with a lot of organizations here in the state of Hawaii just today about how much do they know about FEMA? Do they know their local FEMA reps with what's Region 9? And Region 9 is located just outside of San Francisco in Oakland. And they were like, I never met with a FEMA representative. I don't know what you're talking about, but we need money and we need resources and we need boots on the ground. We need folks to help us rapidly capacity build. And we were like, okay, with that, we're gonna have to build those relationships in gray skies, which is not the best way to do this because it's highly bureaucratic. A lot of these relationships for funding to get on the ground will literally take, anywhere from 90 days to years. And so these are some of the things that David and I, when we get on the ground, like somewhere like here in Hawaii, where we're studying two things, we're doing academic research through action research. So we are actively working with them to understand, what has gone right, what is going wrong, what are some of the interactions with various folks that tend to be siloed. Silos are a big problem, but when we're in a disaster, we're all thrown into the Emergency Operations Center and expected to work like we're good old pals and that we share resources and one of the key resources being money, which is not true at any stage in the game. So what David and I have to do a lot of times is we're like, capacity building and teaching at the same time on governance. And they're like, but I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor, I'm a firefighter, I'm a public health practitioner, and I don't understand the governance or the public administration. And then we find ourselves running a lot of crash courses in ICS, in NIMS, in SIMS, and a whole bunch of alphabet soup, which causes a lot of folks to they're really stressed out and they're angry. They're angry with us, they're angry with FEMA. And it's really because we don't do this blue skies planning to be able to get here. It's very hard. We ourselves and others have a lot of problems with funders in the US, our nonprofit or third sector or philanthropic sector plays a huge role. They want to see, you know, they're looking at mostly meals eaten, shelter beds. They're looking at those kind of tangibles. What they don't look at is that there's a lot of work that has to go on before anybody gets a meal, a hot meal, or you know, as Dave and I call it, 3 hots and a cot. You know, there's a lot that goes on through that. And we particularly built Smart Cohort to deal with that governance issue that has to go on and to work through these silos, to deal with the challenges, and to make this better understood by the academic community, by the government, and by the private sector, which is in the U.S. we call it private sector, but it really breaks down to the philanthropic community and the business community, and they both are very very different. So David and I, like, you know, there's times when we try to talk with Airbnb or Google or these monsters, right, that they claim that they're there to help you, but they also have a very bureaucratic structure in which they work with, and then they work with the public-private partnership aspect of the government, which is glad they're there, but they don't find them necessary. So and so therefore it's a fight between, you know, what's old and new, what the technology is. So we've got in this pandemic, we've got a lot of agencies that move to telemedicine as a way of keeping volume down at hospitals and beds empty. But what we found is they would pick up something from Asia or from Europe or from all of you in the ASEAN region, you know, where they would try to do this. America is not, you know, we have no social safety net. And so when we pick up these things, we really don't realize that folks can't make it to the shelter. They don't have, you know, they don't have these technical devices to be able to have a visit with their doctor. There's a lot of ideas of what folks have. Like, do they have an iPhone? Do they have a Android device? Can they download the app? Do they have digital competency to be able to do so? And so a lot of times with what David and I are doing is road mapping really quickly. When an agency is already put into their plan telemedicine, and they didn't think of the population, whether they're a senior or those kind of things. So that's a small bit of kind of what we do. But we any question you have for us, we'd really like to answer.
I wanted to pick on some of the words that you shared there to make sure everyone's really clear, and I think they're important words: resiliency and social equity. So if either of you or both of you could just discuss the importance of those two words and what they mean: resiliency and social equity.
I'll let Dave get in here.
So resiliency, I think, in the work that we do together, and for me, in my capacity as chair of the Millennium Board, is really looking at long-term recovery and building back better and stronger for the next disaster, and then being able to rapidly respond and rapidly build capacity for whatever disaster may strike, whether that's COVID-19, a hurricane, a cyclone, et cetera, and then making sure it's using a whole community approach. So I look at resiliency and social equity being part of resiliency, not separate. So I look at it as two in the same. Resiliency means that we have social equity and a whole community approach when preparing and mitigating a disaster, when doing rapid response, capacity building, and then when doing long-term recovery.
And I can add to that by saying, when we talk about social equity, normally there's already been a problem in social equity. It doesn't just happen. The disaster didn't cause the social equity. It made it worse, and it made it visible. One of the things that we've been really excited about is we read about New Zealand and the Maori. And it's something that we actually here in Hawaii, we've been actually talking to them more and more about how do we, deal with the issues with API and particularly Native Hawaiians, and can we learn lessons from the Maori and how the government in New Zealand has been able to build a resiliency strategy by using cultural competence. And so these are some of the things that we're looking at here. Here in Hawaii, we're actually looking at how well they're faring, and then being able to look at the African American population and the Latinx population who are doing terrible on the mainland with COVID-19. COVID-19 has been a brush fire through these communities in New York and other places, and we're looking at it, the reasons why. It's inadequate health systems, failure to really understand how to deploy programs, and also being married to failure. Like in the States, we're kind of married. We fund the same programs over and over, and our government, there's a lack of understanding of our government, the good parts of it, and then there's an overlook at like what the personal responsibility is of nice people who do nice, who view themselves as, I'm liberal, I'm neoliberal, I'm really good. But places like San Francisco and Silicon Valley have some of the worst income inequalities and some of the worst living conditions for vulnerable populations. So when we go back and we've got to get models that work. So with David and I at UC Berkeley, we've come out to study what's the best, and we will be there in New Zealand as soon as things open back up, and proving to you all that we're not dirty Americans with our COVID. So that you'll let us in. But being able to study what works, we've got to get back to best practice. We've got to look at cultural competence. Native populations and indigenous people have known how to steward the land. They have been protectors of the land. They understand it from another point of view. It's not some, I'm a native Californian, and we didn't, we still don't get it. Our oceans are just as dirty and and we have a lot of people that make a lot of money off of clean tech. And, they think that that's where it is. It's not that. It's going back to our native populations, understanding from them and their chiefs and the matriarchs and folks that, how this land is actually, set up. So in California, we've learned a lot about fire from the Native American populations. They knew to move, during certain times of the year. They wouldn't be in the back country or in the hillsides. They would be at the ocean. And then, so we understand different things about where water comes. Like here in Hawaii, they understand like how to get clean water and where the rain comes and where not to build a home so that you don't have a mudslide or whatever. So these are some of the things that, Dave and I are looking at, is really harnessing that, making sure that those populations, that they're heard, because a lot of times they're not heard. And we kind of go for some, what we say in California, Whole Foods shopping, Prius driving, solar putting up, some kind of TOD, something out of, some new urbanism philosophy that has nothing to do with how the land works. Because as we understand the land, and we actually have governance structures that do this. So one person that should be lifted up in COVID-19 in the US is Governor Ige of Hawaii. He immediately closed down Hawaii he said, Hawaii is on vacation. And that was like he was very simple about it. I believe he's Japanese Hawaiian, and he said, Hawaii is on vacation and we are closed to visitors. And he did something that was, really, that he closed all the bars, the restaurants, the luau's, everything down. But what that was able to do is contain the spread. It allowed the local people to rely and come up with systems of survival. They came up with like feeding the seniors their kapuna and taking care of the keiki, which is the children. And all of these systems that they are now, you walk around and you see how they're taking care of each other versus kind of like my San Francisco, which is fighting over how we're going to get unhoused people into shelter, even though we're very rich and those hotel rooms are already paid for. So those are some of the things that we're noticing.
So when you are mapping out the system and where things are at in terms of responding, because right now we're responding as a global community rather
That's
than
right.
in preparedness mode, we're responding. And you see different instances in different countries. So New Zealand went into lockdown, never been at that level before, but we have a social support system. You know, we have systems in place. India went into lockdown. Millions of Chaiwalas who came from other villages were suddenly stuck in the city with nowhere to live, no food, no income. And so they had no support system to be able to do what they do. America, I imagine it's a mix of both. You know, you have the governor of, as you said, where there is actually what we would term a cultural understanding of supporting different levels of our community and our families, whereas other communities in America might not have that same understanding. So when you are mapping out, like right now where you are, what are you looking for, and how do you navigate culture to get to the end goal that you have in mind? How do you go through that?
I'll let David take it and then I'll take over. I'll take from him.
Well, I think the first thing is, as field researchers and doing rapid response capacity building, it's not like we don't come with our bias of an end goal or a destination. It's really understanding best practices and then making sure that we're building the rapid response capacity for the existing leaders here to make sure that they have the best emergency management tools and funding from the different federal agencies and different resources. So that could, whether that's technology, organizational tools, personnel, et cetera.
And I think when David and I started out this year in Singapore, and we did that for a reason. We were very called by their stance on equity, and they're the only place where they focus on smart cities, like really highly smart cities, but with an equity lens. And for us being in the States, everywhere we saw that there was even a smart city plan, the inequity was so high. Gentrification, displacement, lack of inclusion, lack of diversity, and people were standing on principle. But what you saw around you was growing homelessness and things. So we started out in Singapore, and we noticed, how they were able to live high density, but they had food security. There was, things were in place. Now, we're not saying that everything's perfect, but things, you could tell that they had done a lot of thought about culture. They really, the idea of culture, about being a multicultural society, about how they were going to deal with threats, ongoing threats and fuel to food to transport, to education, to healthcare. They had really thought it through, and they didn't make an excuse that the economy was not going to function if they did something. But what we noticed is, as we studied the API regions, Asian Pacific Islander, that there was a masking of what their successes, and there was a lot of playing it down. And when we would go, even at Berkeley or Stanford or Harvard or wherever we went, they would say, oh, they're this, or they have this kind of economy, or they have this kind of governance pattern. And I said, well, I look outside my front door. We all live in these lovely high rises, but at the bottom is people that are really suffering. And they're really, it's more like living somewhere in like you talked about India. It's more like living in a very poor area of India with these big towers, where we're all kind of hustling and bustling, but people are, stepping over dead bodies, and they're stepping over people, and everybody's hungry and begging. That safety, that layer in the United States that David and I are looking at, we're going to have to ask ourselves some questions about universal basic income. We're going to have to ask ourselves some questions about Medicare for all, and free transit, and a lot of different things. This, as you noted, that this will be 18 months or longer until we get a vaccine. So this isn't a one-time. What we're always talking to folks about is that they think this is like a fire or a hurricane. They like, the governor's going to lift this and we're going to get back to normal. And we're like, no, we're going to lift this when those numbers, when the body count goes up to a certain, when our hospitals can't have any more ventilators or they're full, then we're all going to go back in. And that's going to, the ride is going to be a very bumpy one. And our economy is not going to be the same. And honestly, David and I were seeing already the reason for this set of research that we started out earlier this year. It was already not doing well. So we were already seeing a decline in the Silicon Valley. We saw a lot. We were seeing layoffs coming. We were seeing increased homelessness. This pandemic just added another layer to that already decline that we were experiencing. So, the issue here in America, when folks go to the polls, when they risk their lives to go to the polls, because we saw that happen in Wisconsin, just a month and a half ago, when folks are going to have to risk their lives to go to the polls. We have a real challenge because these stimulus packages, or the CARES Act, as we call it here in our federal government, has not saved our post office. So the Postal Service is and we're looking at that. We might have to vote by mail. We might be in such a bad shape with COVID-19 in November that we have to vote by mail. But even the Postal Service is under scrutiny right now, and we don't know if it'll last. So there's just a lot of most of us are like, we love being an American, but boy, do we wish we were, from Canada, New Zealand, Australia, or the UK. There's points when we really feel that, how's this going to work out? To be an American right now is to be in a very precarious state. Your housing, we have no renters benefits going through. We have a very slim mortgage, 3 months of mortgage, payments that are tied to our Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve can release funds or not. But our new urbanism has made a lot of people in the denser cities of America renters. So it's 70% renters. We don't have any kind of safety net for those folks. So we've enacted these eviction type of an eviction moratorium. We've enacted moratoriums on shutting people's light and power and their water off. We have these things, but the mounting debt that is accumulating is suffocating. We have, most people are not doing well mentally. We have 30% unemployment, and we're looking at that. Most folks, their employment was tied to their health insurance. So they've lost not only their job, but their health insurance. This makes it very hard because we have a lot of hospitals. We're here in Hawaii. We started to understand that there were a lot of private hospitals as well as public, public and nonprofit hospitals. And because people have insurance and they're not able to pay, the hospitals are now businesses that might go bankrupt. So if you have a situation like here in the Hawaiian Islands, we can't afford to lose any hospitals. And so this situation is one that we're going to have more governance. And so the kind of work that Dave and I started out 5 years ago, people laughed at us. They're the very people that, message us all, like, hey, you understand this? I don't know what you're talking about. You sound crazy, but I'm going to have to listen to you because things are so bad. And so this is kind of how, but when we were talking to people, they're like, I don't get it. I don't understand, because they're very, here in the States, they've been allowed to be in one vertical. And because they received their funding from philanthropy or government or whatever, they functioned in that one vertical. They didn't build friendships. They didn't understand the government. They don't really understand anything out of their vertical. And it's a real bad time for those folks, because they're now, you know, understanding that, you know, that they probably should have, you know, done a lot more to build those relationships in the blue skies. So a lot of the work that we do is we're building those, you know, we're building relationships in the gray skies. And then we're telling them what they have to do. And they're like, I'm an academic, or I've been with a municipality where I didn't have to think about those kind of things. And I certainly didn't have to think about those folks. That was somebody else's thing. But now they're having to deal with their folks that were middle class and comfortably middle class, not being middle class anymore, not having any health insurance. And then they're trying to figure out how, because the U.S. economy is so tied to everything in their lives. So what happened is they lose their job, they lose their health care. The hospital that relies on their health care now is not stable. The stores and everything else, there's no one growing food. They're used to going to the market. The market now doesn't have their supply chain together. And so we're seeing the reverberations. You know, you see people like the milk spoiling, or the agriculture was, you know, instead of giving that agriculture away, the government pays them to spoil the food. It's just, it's one thing after another. And it helps to be in Hawaii where we've kind of dealt with some of those issues.
So understanding this knock-on effect, this flow-on effect that's happening, you're seeing right now, how do you prepare for something in the future, seeing that this is the process that happens now?
Well, we know the Atlantic will have they're predicting the Atlantic is going to have a really bad hurricane season, similar to 2017. With Hurricane Maria and Irma. They're predicting that we're gonna have a bad fire season in California. It's not, we're gonna do COVID through these trying times. And the fall is particularly already very challenging on both sides of the coast. We're trying to figure out, as we talk with folks, the challenge is going to be folks understanding that we're going to have a safety net. And we're going to have to learn from all of you around the world in our other first world nations, how you do it. And we're going to have to accept that that doesn't mean socialism. It doesn't mean that we don't like capitalism. It just means that if we're going to avoid collapse, that we're going to have to, you know, to protect and invest in our own citizens. And that's something that we're looking at. You reach out to Cal OES, and, you know, which is the California Office of Emergency Management. It's trying to find folks that can stop playing with data and actually start doing something. We've gotten into too much data collection and analysis paralysis, and we've got to get folks that are going to implement some of these best practices. So Dave's got some things that he's been working with his board. He might want to share with those things.
Yeah, so with the upcoming active hurricane season, we've been doing, obviously socially distant, different webinars with different community stakeholders on COVID-19 and hurricane season disaster preparedness. So specifically around different policies that would last throughout the hurricane season until we get a vaccine around housing and small business assistance. So it's rental assistance and moratorium, mortgage and expanding it further, commercial leases for small businesses, and then creating a rainy day fund. Ideally, we've been talking about this since Hurricane Irma, but this would be an annual fund in a budget that would be matched down from private sector and philanthropic funding to do rental assistance, small business assistance to fund key nonprofit positions that do critical work in communities, and then fund capacity building work with different emergency management trainings to the college campuses. Something we're really looking at is how do we bring the different trainings and resources for emergency management to the college campuses. So let's say, for example, someone's a nursing student at Florida International University, which is a big public university in Miami or Miami-Dade, and they actually are able to get included with their tuition or their classes a SIMS or NIMS training or an ICS training. How do we bring more of the emergency management components and the education to both the schools, the nonprofits, and the government, so we build actual disaster resilience and not just talking about resiliency and kind of what Carla was saying, the Whole Food shopping, Prius driving kind of lens. So it's both the structural policies to safeguard investments, housing, small businesses, et cetera, throughout hurricane season, but then also that training and constant capacity building.
So David, you're bringing those
County
together. Sorry, Carla. So David, you're bringing together this perspective then that it does need to be action orientated, right? So it's, yes, we need to have some money because there are some issues that money can solve, but actually we need to have people who can do critical work in communities with those people who are at need. And you're having to think COVID is going to be this persistent thing. Plus, we need to respond to something that is seasonal, like fire and hurricane. And then we have these institutional issues, which are constantly creating a barrier. Then we have cultural differences. So you have these four different issues you're having to deal with. So is this why you choose action research?
Yes.
Because you have to be doing it. It has to be, and it's got to be pracademic. We do have to have some of the academic aspects in there, but you can't sit back. We don't have that luxury of sitting back and kind of doing the after action report and taking that approach. You know, David and I are younger and you know, more ethnic than most people that are in our EOCs or that we deal with. And a lot of times we're talking to them from a lens that is way different. You know, like when I go talking to my, you know, talking to our Governor Newsom's office, and I'm trying to get them to move. The issue is people can't just stay at home. Like they've, you know, there's a lot of, you know, like I've been very noted for pushing my Democrats in office in California, that they've got a real kind of thing, stay at home. Well, stay at home when you can't pay that rent. It's already, you know, we're talking about sometimes a studio can be as much as $3,000 a month. And then, you know, and you're talking about someone staying home and 90 days worth of rent is, you know, you're looking at $9,000. That's, you know, that's a very, you know, large amount of money, not to include any utilities or cell service or whatever. And so we're telling him, like, if you want people to stay at home, then we're going to have to provide them some kind of rental assistance. The bread lines in all around the U.S. are averaging 4.5 hours. You need a tank of gas and a lot of them don't let you walk up and get your groceries. And there's no public transit to get there. So you're going to wait for, you know, some groceries with a whole tank of gas that might be $100 for 4 hours for something that's about $30 or $40 worth of groceries. I mean, things like this don't make sense. It makes more sense to give folks a direct deposit of like $3,000 or $4,000 because when you're looking at all the money you have to put out to a nonprofit, somebody has to get the food, somebody has to pack it, somebody has to deal with the lines, and people are very desperate right now. They've lost their jobs. They are really desperate. So we have to have the National Guard. So every facet of the Guard gets called up to not to do the basics. Guard has to handle food. The Guard has to be the ones who take care of folks You know, they have to have nurses and doctors, because our system doesn't provide for enough doctors and nurses. As you saw probably on your televisions, that we have to take our convention centers and turn them into hospitals. We really don't have a good system, so we have to, like, our military has to build off-site hospitals. And so what Dave and I do a lot of is, like, we talk to folks about, like, when we're rapid capacity building, like what we're doing here in Hawaii, they can't understand. First of all, they want to know, how are we getting paid? And we tell them we have a grant, you know, we have nonprofit that we do this kind of work, because Americans are very leery. Where are you getting your money? Are you coming here to steal ours? And we told them, no, we're not. Our money's coming from the West Coast, where we're at Berkeley and we're applying for grants. And then we're telling them, they're like, well, you're going to bring us help, right? And I said, yes, we're bringing you help. And then they're like, you're going to go back to Berkeley and the Berkeley students are going to provide us all the assistance. And we said, absolutely not. If we're doing our job right, that's not how this works. We don't get to be we're working with wanting to work with the University of Hawaii. We're working with the teachers and the folks that have been laid off. Can we get them into contact tracing? Can we get them into understanding how we reach out to Native Hawaiians that may be off the grid? We're building there's a project at University of Hawaii where they can split a ventilator to take care of 4 patients at once. We're saying, okay, if we're doing this right, then we've been able to get a new technology that's here at U of H, that ventilator is built here in Hawaii, and we put a lot of young engineers and young Hawaiians to work on these things, and we've created an economy, more of the agriculture here, so they're not reliant. You know, I'm sure my folks in California aren't happy with me talking, because they do send a lot of produce and stuff over and goods over here, but that's not what we need. We need the folks in these local economies to be functional. They need to get capital. They need to build in their own communities. And when we're talking about getting resilient, that's what it means. Putting that money into, getting the shutters and the tile roof, getting the roofs, being able to do the resiliency work local. And it's about those local people getting funding, and our emergency management program being more transparent. Because it's not transparent. It's very hard to navigate. And then we're teaching our different layers that would be in that structure, that NIMS and ICS structure, that they start working together now. So like Dave's, we're always bringing in the emergency manager for Miami-Dade, and we always bring Frank out, and Frank tells them how it goes, so we had a transportation camp last year that was it was like new mobility and all about mobility. So there's a Tesla program at the community college in Miami-Dade, and there's all kinds of different things. And then we brought Frank Rollison, the emergency manager. And so, they were hearing from him, and he was telling them, hey, well, here's what you do during a hurricane. Don't wait around. Because don't have the what is that in the bathtub? There's some people who like to get drunk and stay in their house and wait and try to ride it out. Yeah. And we found out the reason why they were riding it out is because they felt that they had no money to go anywhere, and if they lost their home, they would have lost their job. They might as well die in their house. So they were having a hurricane party, because if it's all for naught, might as well party it away. So if we want folks to comply, and that's like what I'm trying to work with my governor on, Governor Gavin Newsom, is if we want folks to comply, we've got to give them something to live for. And we've got to make sure that they are not so heavily indebted that they don't care about wearing a mask. They don't care about social distancing. These are the things. So it's kind of this behavioral economics in behavioral resilience too.
This has been incredibly informative and interesting, and I think that all of our faculty and our students will be really informed by it. I did want to ask just one question to wrap up with. I'd love to hear from both of you on this. So if someone's looking to do what you do and make an impact in the way that you do, how could they build their studies, their career? What sort of learning experiences would be really valuable to make a contribution like both of you do?
Well, I can say my capacity with the Millennial Board is definitely, if you're a student at university or researcher, whether it's undergrad or PhD or entry university, start building relationships with your professors and understanding where their research interests align, and start looking at the possibilities of PhD programs, and go in it with the lens where you can explore research and it has to match up with the professor's interest. There's a lot of funding for this. Also, really spend a lot of time, if you're in the United States, studying, reaching out to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, both at an HQ in DC, but also your region. So Region 9 if you're on the West Coast, Region 4 if you're in Florida in the Southeast. So really understand and find opportunities to learn. Their trainings, their different private-public partnership summits, all that. There's a lot of opportunities in this space, but you got to go do it. There's a lot of folks that do emergency management that their doors never get knocked on. So I just say, knock on those doors, ask questions, be persistent, and really go in it from the lens of being a public servant and being able to really serve and do something beyond yourself.
And I would say what you need to do is volunteer at the EOC. There's nothing. I think the first thing when I did a graduate work in emergency management at Cal State Long Beach, and I had an opportunity in 2007 to volunteer, in the EOC. And it turned out the fire season, of 2007, the season was just, really something. And I got thrown right into the EOC, got my vest on, and I got the ride of my life. Staying up, those shifts and dealing with web EOC. And there's nothing in this work. There's nothing but to do it. And then it's to talk to people that have worked many, many, many disasters and get in there and really talk with them. It's very important. David and I have some years on David. It's always important to work with folks that this is not, it is expensive. I'm going to say, we're here in Honolulu. David, is a great fundraiser. I will not try to tell you that this is an easy route to go. Some communities make it easier, but you really do need to be working with folks to look at that, governance component, the financing, who's a good fundraiser, and folks, because you've got to be plugged into that to be able to be at that ready level where you're going to be able to do all of this. I can't underplay that. And you've got to have thick skin. The EOC is not a place or emergency management for nice talking, mindful people who need to have a lot of conversations and that really have thin skin. You can't do this, and in particularly, I can speak to people that are people of color. This is, if you're touchy and you're going to be all caught up about things, this is not the place to be. So, really it's the idea of getting that experience in, joining, in America, it's ASPA, American Society of Public Administrators, and the section on emergency management. There's also the International Emergency Management Association. So IEMIA, I think it is. Yeah. And then it's, for me, I can tell you, David made me start traveling. I was a Californian that was just happy going up and down the state. And the state's about 1,100 miles long. And I really never got out of my bubble. And I felt that and I'm speaking to Americans because all of you travel extensively. Americans don't travel very much. And I do think it really makes sure that we don't learn anything. So the best thing that I've ever done is like started to travel, getting out around the world, understanding different governance structures, understanding different social structures, and then understanding the disaster. Because it makes a big difference on how we can go in and do response and recovery, is understanding those cultural competences and the governance structures.
Powerful. It's powerful stuff, both of you. Thank you so much for your time. David, we connected on LinkedIn. How can people get hold of you if they want to look at your research, find out more about you, David, and Carla, you as well? What's the best way for people to find out more about you and what you do?
So definitely. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Both of us are very active on LinkedIn. So it's just linkedin.com/cmays is hers, and mine is David-Capelli. Again, I can provide you those links and share with your audience. And then also on Twitter for research insights, trends, policies, etc. On Twitter @Carla Mays. And then my Twitter is @David K as in Kansas, Capelli, CAPELLI. And we encourage folks to connect with us on LinkedIn.
And some of our research is actually published on LinkedIn, so you'll find different hyperlinks to presentations and the conferences and things we presented at. You can also find some of our work in some of the public administration, the ASPA, American Society of Public Administration journals. And we're going to be doing a lot more work. We like the fact that collaboration, and so we collaborate with a lot of folks that are a lot smarter than us and have more years in the field, so that we kind of ground that research in that. And we're always looking for collaborators, and we're really interested in coming there to New Zealand and learning more, because emergency management, it's ironic that America has a lot of disasters, but we don't have a lot of research, and we don't have a lot of our universities that have programs in emergency management. So we're all learning more, and we're looking forward to continuing this relationship with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward.